I'm back with the PBM Princess herself, Miss Rachel Strauss. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here in the new studio. And, just I guess I say a quote unquote quick trip up 45, or did you fly?
I flew.
I figured as much. Were you in town for other reasons? Did you have some other stuff around this?
I did make some other meetings,
okay.
but you figured.
But this is the anchor. This is the real reason.
What was that all about? So you figured I didn't drive. What is that all about?
Well, because I wouldn't make that drive.
Okay. All right. Just curious what you're calling me
does
out.
the PBM Princess drive herself?
I do. I go. You know what? I have a rule now that I try to not drive any more than 4 hours in a day. And it's really about safety and about, the multitasking that I think all of us do when we're on the road. I mean, listen, I'm really good at putting my phone on the seat. I actually turn it on silent. I make, if someone calls me, it'll be on my Bluetooth. But I don't have the self-control to not check emails. And so, if I'm going to be missing more than 4 hours of emails and it's,
does it give you anxiety knowing that?
It gives me anxiety.
Yeah,
and it's,
I'm the same
listen,
way.
I will tell you, I understand, the importance of our jobs. I love what we do. But I do have to check myself sometimes because we are not doctors. There are no lives that are, going to be lost if Rachel Strauss does not reply to an email. But I do believe that I want to know what's going on. I get anxiety.
I do too.
So, but that's the
unplugging is the hardest thing in the world for me. Like I told somebody this the other day, like the idea of taking a nap scares me because I can't, even if I'm disconnected for 30 minutes in the middle of the day, even on a weekend, I'm like, I got to be doing something.
And I'm able to delegate or not reply, but it's the unknown. That's what I hate. I hate not knowing.
What is this opportunity that's
I want to
missing?
say it's a perfect world, or somebody's a problem. You want to be able to fix things.
Totally.
That's what we do.
Well, I'm in agreement with you. I'm not giving you a hard time because I'm in
good.
total agreement
All
with
right.
you. But let's catch up real quick. I know obviously you've been on the podcast before. You've also done some of the kind of road show, shorter versions of the podcast. But real quickly, just in case anybody, this is their first introduction to the PBM Princess, who are you and tell me what you do?
Sure. So, I have this ridiculous nickname, PBM Princess. I've decided to own it mainly because why not? I mean, I didn't hate it.
And somebody else gave you the name. It's
somebody
not like you
else.
coined
I did not coin
that.
it. Somebody gave me the name. Probably. It started because I was doing an art project with my daughter. This was pre-pandemic, and glitter got on one of my proposals. And the consultant I was with made a joke and basically said, "I feel like you would still put glitter on a presentation if you could." And I was like, you know what? I probably would. So it kind of started and. I think, Spencer, as we, everybody in this industry and what I believe is really, the people who a lot of, are recognized and respected are people who are authentic.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm not authentically a princess, but I'm authentically me. So yes, that's kind of what I've gone
Well,
with.
and it's not like, again, you didn't give yourself the name and it fits. And what's wrong with having, a recognizable persona, right? We're all obviously in the sales world and you have to make yourself memorable somehow. So PBM Princess is a perfect way to do that.
Thank you. So I've been doing this, PBM gig 21 years.
Okay.
I've spent my entire career with EHIM. I have a little bit of a different path to, this industry in that I started in underwriting for pharmacy benefits and then kind of through my career and really learning that my favorite part about underwriting was not just the numbers. I do love the numbers, but it was really when a broker, consultant, or somebody would call to ask about the numbers or would say, hey, I have this proposal versus that proposal. Can you figure out what's different? And can you help me understand? And yes, that's, kind of getting into sales territory because I wanted to sell our numbers, but I also understood really how this industry worked. And it really gave me the background and passion for helping people and educating about the industry.
Cool. Very cool. And you mentioned by the numbers, and we're going to have a conversation about the numbers of PBMs here in a moment. But I think probably what might be appropriate is since there's been some recent changes in the world of EHIM that were announced publicly a few months back, or how long has it been since the acquisition?
It has been since July of 2022.
Okay. So a little less than a year now, but obviously with that comes opportunity, maybe some changes operationally and processes and things like that. So why don't you talk about what's going on there?
Sure. So last July, EHIM merged through acquisition to a company called ProCare Rx. ProCare is a privately held company. It is owned by a husband and a wife. They founded the company, I believe, 37 or 38 years ago, right about the same time EHIM was founded. And really, ProCare made their name in the pharmacy benefit industry as a systems company. They're really known as primarily for backroom technology. At one point, I believe they housed I think 70% of every pharmacy transaction in the country was going through their system in some capacity. Yeah, and really they've evolved. They do own a few different PBMs. And with the acquisition of EHIM, really what this was about was giving the ability to EHIM, really somebody called it recently a glow up. It is giving a glow up. And what that means is that they do not intend to change EHIM. They do not. In fact, they're adding to our workforce in Detroit, which was our corporate office. ProCare is headquartered in Gainesville, Georgia. So that's where, the bulk of the executives are for their company. They also have offices in Puerto Rico and in Florida. And to hear, I am a Detroiter natively, even though I've spent almost 10 years now in Texas, to hear that they're hiring and continuing to grow this, what was originally a Detroit-based company, is what you want to hear when your company is acquired.
Well, so talk to me a little bit about the story of EHIM, if you could just elaborate on kind of the strengths you had prior to the acquisition, and maybe what would have attracted a ProCare Rx to acquire you guys.
Yeah, sure. So EHIM, we really were and continue to be this beautiful pharmacy benefit manager that really, carved our space and on the hallmark of what we were, which was that EHIM believes we were transparent before it was fashionable to be so. EHIM, for lack of a better phrase, was known as the quote, no rebate PBM. Our CEO, Mindy Fink, and founder, when she started the company, she had a background prior to EHIM working in a doctor's office in a nursing capacity, and, saw pharmaceutical reps and saw the power they held on doctors. And it was right around that time in the 80s when she started EHIM that physicians were being hammered for getting, there was all these anti-kickback laws going into play. The doctors could no longer go to Hawaii because they were the #1 writer of Lipitor at the time, which was a big cholesterol drug in the 80s. And really, doctors were going on trips for writing their drugs. And it had nothing to do with about efficacy. It had to do with money in somebody's pocket. And that got, really hammered. And Mindy believed that the next logical space for this to happen would be on the payer side. And so Mindy, for the 35 years of this amazing company that she built, created, it quite literally was her child, and she was able to hang her hat and retire saying that she did every day what she believed in.
Did she retire as a part of it?
Mindy has stepped back, yes. She is no longer running EHIM operations, but she got to finish her career and really say she did to the end what she believed, was the right fit for her, for the members, for the clients that we served. EHIM did not participate in rebates. And, with any company, Spencer, and this is whether we were acquired or not. I mean, this part of what keeps a PBM, any company relevant is evolution. And, part of, I think, what has happened in the last few years and where the acquisition came to be was really, I believe there was starting to be a fork in the sand, with kind of that Robert Frost tale of two paths, which one are you going to go down? And
would the two paths be rebates or no rebates?
It wasn't just rebates or no rebates. It was, how do we evolve and which way do we walk down? And, the good side about, transparency is that rebates are evolving. They're no longer necessary. They don't have to be. They're still games that rebates play. And we can talk about that later in the hour. Please, but it's, I think it was about, okay, if EHIM we're constantly figuring out what is in the best fit for our clients and how can we be transparent about it. The other piece was, in that name of transparency, evolving from a data perspective, really being able to give our clients and our brokers the best access to data possible. And to be honest, that was one of EHIM's, it wasn't a wart, but it was because we spent so many resources managing the spend, managing members' behavior and formularies, which we were, I will tell you, I believe best in class at doing. We weren't evolving the tech. We weren't evolving in, the online access, looking up pharmacies, being able to get, from a broker perspective, pull their clients' claims immediately. They had to come to us and we had to get them the claims. And it wasn't as user-friendly as I think some of the industry was moving towards. And it's not a simple click of a button for any PBM to give access like that, because it's a tech side. And so I think as Mindy was evolving and determining where we would live, who would help us with the tech, I think ProCare, being best in class at that back room for PBMs, a lot of PBMs live on ProCare systems. They don't own the PBM, but they hire ProCare to back room. And so I believe in the conversations she had with Roger and his executive team at ProCare, the founder, I believe that's where, the conversations began about what if EHIM were to become part of the ProCare family of companies. And
well, you certainly don't have to advocate for me the power of technology or the need for technology and software to solve problems. I mean, it's funny in my space, you'll see brokers that use all these sophisticated underwriting tools and AI and all this stuff, and then they're still spreadsheeting benefits in Excel, which, don't get me wrong, I love Excel. But it's like there's so many pieces of our business that are in need of a digital transformation and are kind of stuck in this old mindset of ways of doing things. Of course, obviously, my bias is towards plan site. But it makes sense, right? If you guys do a lot of things very well, but if there was a perceived deficiency in tech and somebody comes in and says, hey, we've got the tech and we do this back room for all these other PBMs, all you're doing is really supercharging the value proposition that EHIM has.
Right. And I think the other piece, and, I don't got to shortchange, and I know that this will probably raise some questions in the future, is the other piece that EHIM was known for in the industry is for more than 2 decades. EHIM has really had, we believe we pioneered specialty drug savings and really not just savings, but specialty drug strategies and how to, create formularies that are, built from an efficacy standpoint, but also to make sure that cost containment and, really making sure the right drugs, right time, right patient are put in place. And so I believe, that umbrella is called EHIM Cares, and it's more than just specialty drugs. It's everything that we put into the formulary design and management. And I think that was one piece ProCare, they had a version of, but, it may not have been as user-friendly or it wasn't as evolved. I don't want to shortchange what ProCare has done and is doing for a number of clients. But by coming together, and when you're an employee of a company that's acquired, I think, I worked there for 20 years before we were acquired. And
there's always a little bit like, well, what's going to happen?
What's going to happen? It was very emotional.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, especially the relationship you had with Mindy, too.
I had a very close relationship.
21 years,
21 years. When she told me it was done, it wasn't like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. It was like, we're done. Like I sold. It wasn't, I'm thinking of selling. It was, I sold the company, and it was, and she did tell me face to face. It was not like an email. It was, and by the way, just because I got to talk about Mindy for a minute. I mean, Mindy told every employee one by one. It was, and once she announced it, had one-on-one meetings with all 200 of our employees.
200, wow.
One-on-one, sat in her office, wanted people to feel okay, feel excited, and this was not. When you hear acquisition, I'm not really into the M&E world. I mean, my closest thing is I know, Richard Gere did that in Pretty Woman. It's like I'm not really, I can use the words, but it's not really so you hear M&A and you hear, all these horrible stories of companies being dissolved or broken up or, or worse, in my opinion, when you talk about acquisitions in any space and you find out, well, what is the motivating factor? Is it private equity and all they care about is EBITDA and all they care about is maximizing what you're earning? And because that's going to change a company whose primary interest is solving.
It might change the culture.
It changes the culture. Yeah. And I got to tell you, I think maybe because it's a family business, it feels the same as EHIM. Good. It's got, they care about people. They care about making sure we feel good. And that doesn't mean there's not stressful days, but I got to tell you, even on a stressful day, the person I report to makes sure I still feel appreciated. And, and maybe I need to look at something from a different angle because we all constantly need to evolve even as people and be critiqued in our own roles. And now I have fresh perspective on me as an employee. But I feel appreciated, and I think that my colleagues would agree that, they're very excited about, what we bring and continue.
Well, now I was going to say, one of the things that I wanted to cover this with you, right? Because it was going to slightly perhaps alter going forward a little bit of what you talk about.
Yeah.
But what I do want to make sure with the audience here is you are my go-to person when I have PBM questions.
Oh, I love that.
You are literally the person like, hey, what do I do? What do I need to know? What should I think about this? Not necessarily you're telling me what to say, but it's like, hey, I know I trust you to tell me what's what.
Yeah.
Our new CEO that came in, he said, I don't care what it is as long as you tell me what it is. It's knowing, even if it's bad, you tell me what it is. So why don't we talk about PBMs, where we are in the marketplace in general today? And the kind of the most obvious question to me that I've had my own, and you actually said this to me the other day as well, is like the question of why are there so many PBMs.
Yeah.
There. I don't even know how many there are, but
There's
to be
a lot.
in the
And
hundreds.
I'll tell you, my husband is a broker. And he gets, hit up by so many PBMs like, hey, I'm going to be in town. Can we meet? And he has a canned response. No, I'm so sorry. I'm married to my PBM. And they're like, well, no, you got to hear it. And he's like, no.
Literally.
Literally, I am married to my PBM. And unless, the client of mine wants it, whatever. So I do know there's a lot.
Yeah.
And, before I answer the question, I'm going to, come back to the expert in the self-funded space, self-funded with Spencer.
Yeah.
Why are there so many MGUs in the, in the stop loss?
In stop loss world?
Yeah.
One, I think it's just there's an immense opportunity. The last number I've seen is like it's a $27 billion industry and growing. So if you get even just a tiny fraction of that, that's a lot of money. And two, I think because it's a model that's been around for decades and decades, I mean, you can replicate it with good people, a little bit of expertise and some sales acumen. I mean, it's not like you're building sophisticated technology that requires millions of dollars of investment. You just really need good people and know what you're doing.
Yep.
So that's probably, I mean, that me just kind of brainstorming out loud.
I hate that you just kind of gave the answer, but
Okay.
I wanted to frame it because it's not that much different.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
in the PBM space, it's a decades-old industry, right? I mean, PBM started in the 80s, really, is when the first ones started around. And, when you think about the opportunity in the industry, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's multiple ways to do it. And the final piece, and this is different, I think, than necessarily the stop-loss world, is that you don't have to do all the services yourself to represent a pharmacy benefit manager. And I've learned that so much, especially with the acquisition, because of the back label, things that ProCare provides. Quite honestly, to PBMs, I had no idea and, saw them as competitors. And, so for a PBM to start, if you just want to, a lot of these new PBMs are really marketing PBMs. They are taking backroom functions. Some of them, don't own their own network. They're leasing somebody else's network. They don't do their own clinical. They're using another company's clinical. They don't do their own rebates. The majority, by the way, of PBMs do not. And now, rebates is a category. I thought I knew a lot.
We're going to spend minutes or not 10, 15 minutes on rebates for sure. I want to do that.
Just to understand how many layers are even within rebate aggregation. So many PBMs are not doing their own rebates. And by the way, when all these PBMs use the word transparent, they're transparent because they're not doing these functions themselves, and they can transparently tell you all these things. Because they're using outside companies that are not as transparent.
Well, so I won't say who, but there is a model like that in the TPA space, that they're basically the back room for all these TPAs that you have no idea. They're doing all the actual blocking and tackling.
Correct.
And like you said, the front-facing TPAs are mostly the marketing engine around it. Nothing wrong with that, but that sounds like that's what's happening.
It is, and so, and that's why, when you talk about PBMs and you talk about, vendor selections and how do you pick a PBM and in the spreadsheet game and using all these different things, it's awful because it's a game and everybody's interpreting things differently and there's not an even playing field, and that's why there's so many PBMs, because everybody's taking one piece of an area that you can critique and they're saying we're the best at that. You've got PBMs.
Everybody's the best. That's
right.
What
You've got a PBM that I know that's out there that their whole entire marketing strategy is their contract, and they're like, we're going to give you all the terms you want, know. And so the question is okay, if they're giving a consultant all the definitions that they want. You still got to figure out what are they missing, or who's doing other things behind the scenes that maybe they're not controlling. They can control it's complex. But again, that's why there's so many PBMs. Everybody's finding. I mean, look, Mark Cuban is getting into the game.
Yeah. What is your kind of opinion on that? Like, as objective as you can be, I'd like to hear the model, and then why you even think Mark Cuban got in this space other than money?
Well, the first thing I'll tell you is I love that Mark Cuban got in this space, but primarily because I have friends now, not in our industry, that had no idea what I do for a living, but now that Mark Cuban's talking about pharmacy benefit management,
they're all of a sudden interested.
Oh, is that what you do? Is it better? Is it worse? It's I have friends, Spencer, for 20 years who will tell you I'm a pharmaceutical rep. It's I'm exactly not a rep.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite of a drug rep, in fact. But, I think Mark Cuban entering the space, well, first I'm going to say, Mark Cuban literally is best known. I mean, here in Dallas, I know he is known for many things outside of this, but nationally, Mark Cuban is known for being a what?
owner of the Mavericks.
Well, no, that's in Dallas. I'm saying
what
nationally, what word
Well,
comes to
Shark
mind?
Tank.
First word?
What? Shark.
He's a shark.
A shark.
A shark
Okay,
doing
okay.
what? He's there to
Make money. Yeah,
to make
okay,
money. Okay, so I don't want to. I do believe in the benevolence of Mark Cuban. I think he is wonderful. He's philanthropic. I don't live here in Dallas, but I imagine he does incredible things for the community. So I do believe. I don't want this to sound like I am discrediting the.
Yeah.
But Mark Cuban's a businessman.
Of course he is. Yeah.
And, if you are a businessman, I think you find a need. What did he find a need? He found a need because as an employer, he saw the games that especially the big three PBMs were playing. He saw an opportunity, right, to come in, but he also did it to make money.
Of
right?
course.
So it's
well, and I wouldn't begrudge him of that decision either. I mean, why would you build a business? It's not to lose
correct.
money. Right?
So I think that, I don't think he's the savior of the industry.
But what about the model itself? Because to me, it sounds like reference-based pricing. And
so it's kind of like reference-based pricing, but in my opinion, and again, I haven't gone behind the weeds. I don't know his PBM, but from what I've seen from, repricing and looking at different things, everybody attacked the pharmacy benefit industry, 15 years ago for spread pricing. And spread pricing, for listeners that may not be as familiar with this concept, it's basically when you take the cost that you are, negotiating with a pharmacy, when the PBM does, and they mark it up, and that's where their profit comes from. It's the markup in what the pharmacy's billing and what they charge the client, right? So they get a $15 drug, they're charging $25, they're keeping $10.
Okay.
The industry, by the way, got a bad name because it was much more egregious than $10 a script.
I believe that, yeah.
And it was interesting to me because the literal name of Mark Cuban's launch was Cost
Plus, right? Yeah.
Which is a cost plus a number, which, by the way, is taking us back. That's spread. I mean, he's basically saying, I'm going to charge you a plus margin on each drug, and that's going to be...
Was there any validity to showing what the spread is?
So that's the transparent part, is he's showing the spread, and, but it's what is the basis of cost? Where are you getting that basis of cost? And that's where it gets a little bit more complex. And look, on certain drugs, he was blowing away every PBM. On some drugs, he wasn't as competitive because he didn't have the market share, right? And he didn't have the volume of script purchasing. Look, I think as he evolves in the industry, I think he's going to be a player. But you also have to understand, being that I come from the underwriting side and I go through RFPs and we, do postmortems when we don't win, we understand when we do win. I don't believe there's that much margin in this industry. I believe that every PBM is within, if everybody is honest and everybody is using their negotiating power and everybody is using what they need to make to keep the lights on. And I don't care how you bake that in. Is it from spread? Is it from a PEPM? Is it from a per transaction? Is it from percentage of rebates? Whatever it is, we should all be within 3 to 4% of each other.
Okay.
There's just not that much margin when all factors are taken into account.
Okay.
The question is, what are you going to do about the claims? What are you going, I hate the typical phrase in our industry that the claims are the claims. It bugs me when you hear that in stop loss. It bugs me when you hear it from a carrier. I truly believe that, it's about strategy. It's about partnership. It's about not hiring a vendor that just is going to process claims and give you the best price, because people buy insurance because people get sick. People are buying these products because we have evolutions in healthcare and things are getting more expensive with those evolutions. And it's going to be, how are you going to contain cost and how are you going to manage my trend?
Yeah, so the claims are the claims is a kind of a lazy response in my opinion, because the claims are the claims unless you actually do something about them, whether prospectively or retroactively. There's things that you can do. But the notion of that, well, those are just the claims, and then my premium's a function of that. Well, you have no strategy then, if that's your response.
And conditions are conditions. That you can say. The conditions are the conditions, unless you're, but again, I think, so, to kind of summarize, I think that the PBM competition is great. I think it's causing more and more people to consider other solutions than the big three PBMs. But I do believe this is a relationship business. And I think that at the end of the day, I think that, the more PBMs are out there, it's good.
Well, I'll say the big thing for me is with that relationship is the trust, right? Like I have a very strong element of trust with you. When I ask you a question, I'm going to get a straight answer. So for me, that's good enough. Now, I obviously know that consultants have a lot more responsibility than I
Yes.
do to dig into that and to ensure that trust. But for me, it starts with trust, right?
Yep.
And then what is that level of trust I have that you're going to give me the best answer for my client, and you're going to do what you say you're going to do, which is where that really trust, that's the foundation of trust itself, is
Yep.
you're going to do what you say you're going to do. I like stories, though, if we could pivot for a minute.
Sure.
One of the reasons I like to get to know people as much as what they do is because there's always good stories there. I am sure in working in this space for 2 decades that you've got some kind of wild stories or maybe most egregious thing you've seen or horror stories of PBM. So what comes to mind when I ask a question like, I think you said something about like repricing.
Yeah,
or
I mean,
like
there's all kinds of games. And, I think that, we have seen, a consultant once told me a story and then showed it to me because he wanted me to figure out what they were doing. But basically, he got so sick of all the PBM RFPs and everybody's showing these crazy savings and here I am saying there's really only 4 or 5%. So it's got to be in the strategy. It can't just be in a reprice unless, again, something's egregious. But he sent his own claim file, like the group's own claim file, to the incumbent vendor. So this PBM, it was their client. He stripped it, made up a new name, new SIC code, gave him a new address, changed all the demographic, sent it to the PBM, and they saved 30% on their own claim file from the previous year.
Okay.
And so it's kind of
what do you think's going on there then?
So basically, he did. He went back to them and was like, ruh-roh, you've got some explaining to do here.
Yeah.
How is this? And they came back like, oh, well, they're not in our high impact formulary. And, we're making certain assumptions that we can move these drugs to those drugs. And so all of a sudden, this amazing reprice, it was using different assumptions, and that they were like, we didn't realize, it was, we're going to be able to do better on discounts next year. And so all of a sudden, the PBM was left scrambling and making, but if this group is already in a formulary that was established by this PBM, it cast doubt, right? I mean, it basically said that there's no way that you're going to change everybody because you have them now. And if you can,
so did it suggest the predicted future savings was misleading in order to acquire the group? Okay.
And that's, it sheds light on the games.
Yeah,
and,
I hate that.
And they had answers for it because they had to.
No, of course.
But I basically said, I'm like, get it in writing, man. Like say that's what they're going to get next year. And no PBM is going to give you that in writing.
Man, well, that sounds like a little bit of a game, but it's like the same thing, right? When you go get a cell phone and you're a new customer and you get a special deal, and then you find out over time your costs end up creeping up or weren't exactly what you thought. I mean, I realize that you have to be super competitive and maybe, I don't want to say exaggerate, but show optimized savings potential on paper to get a group. I get that, but
it gets egregious.
Yeah,
I mean, it's I think, and it's, look, we're learning that, there's PBMs out there that use some of their programs to offset discounts. I mean, and it's just, I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, to me, the parallel in my world at PlanSide is we've talked to some of our customers that have used the system for a few years, and they tell us on average they save like 3 to 5 hours per RFP per year. Okay. That we've been told that that's a conservative number. Well, rather than me going out and say, well, I'll save you 10 to 15 hours per RFP and show this like enormous thousands upon thousands, we're going, all right, conservatively speaking, we know at least we can prove this. If it happens to be more than that, well, awesome. I over delivered.
Yep.
But if I over promised to acquire business, then I'm going to have some explaining to do if I wasn't able to meet expectations.
And that's, if anybody listens to this, I hope consultants hold their PBMs accountable.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they do. I think you put it in and then 3 years later you run it for RFP again, a lot of times, or 1 year for those listening that are in favor of the 1 year contract. I think it's just, nobody looks 6 months later to see, well, what did they quote? How are they running? It's amazing to me.
Well, all right, so let's move on to kind of the subject that I think we were spend some time on, and it was a subject last episode, but I think is worthy to readdress is, you call the whole word, the rebate, the 7-letter, 4-letter word.
I
so
did,
why? Yeah. And I know it's probably, relevant to discuss even with the changes.
It's relevant because EHIM is evolving, but, I think, look, rebates.
Can we explain rebates real quick?
Yeah,
in case
rebates,
I'll
start again, with kind of just a high level. Rebates are essentially, manufacturer dollars that are earmarked to offset the cost of their own medications. That is what rebates are supposed to do, right? I mean, you think about buying a TV, you get a rebate, and for many, many years, and some rebates, by the way, are still set up like this today, are there not just to offset the cost of their drug, but they're almost commission. They're like, they're pushing their product. They are, there are circumstances in some cases with rebates, that have to happen in order for a PBM to maximize on those rebates. And what EHIM's philosophy always was if we are taking these rebates, or we are set up, and by the way, we still believe this, if you are set up to maximize rebates, you are set up to maximize the highest cost medications out there.
Okay.
And that is where the true misalignment is with rebates. And, when you talk about rebates and you look at, how they impact formularies, I mean, rebates are why drugs can't shift to generic fast enough, because rebate contracts or formularies may lock, depending on the PBM's approach to rebates, they can lock a member into those rebates. They lock the plan into the rebates, meaning the drug has to stay on formulary. For example, just last week, and again, for when this goes to air, in February of 23, we just found out that one of the diabetic medications, the insulins out there, was going to continue going down at a fraction of the cost. And so, the question is everybody going to be able to take advantage of that? Well, if you have a rebate on a competitive product that locks that drug on your formulary, basically the circumstance may be, PBM, you're going to get a ton of rebate, but we want drug exclusivity. Meaning that drug is the only drug on your formulary. We don't care if another drug comes out that's pennies on the dollar. You can't cover it.
You can't get it, yeah.
So that is the problem. And that was always EHIM's fundamental problem with rebates, is we can't shift on a dime. If EpiPen is doing the same thing and we can go get the generic, we wanted to be able to do that. And I don't think it was until the last couple years, where, with more rebate aggregation and different ways to go about rebates, that was, kind of a shift. And some of these smaller PBMs have taken advantage of that in the pass-through and transparent way. So as EHIM was evolving and figuring out, do we want to get involved with it? Do we give our claims to a rebate aggregator, right, and just let them go do it? So we can do our job first, right? We're going to work on maximizing the formulary, but then, listen, our whole thing was there was no money on the table. That was what that was the hook I held my hat on. It evolved. And I think that with the aggregation and pharma getting the data they wanted a different way, there began to be money on the table. Okay. And so, listen, we were not there to do a disservice to our clients. The minute we realized it was time was when, we kind of started saying, how can we be who we are? And now, with the acquisition of ProCare, we get to be everything.
Can you still maintain that flexibility?
Yes.
Okay.
So EHIM is always going to be a lowest net cost company. I mean, that is who we are.
Explain lowest net cost.
Sure. It means that we are going to, in every circumstance, whether it's specialty, whether it's brand, whether it's generic, over the counter, we are going to determine how our formulary should be structured based on the net lowest cost to the plan.
Okay.
And we also want the freedom and flexibility to adapt, meaning if a drug like the diabetic medication goes lower, we want to immediately capitalize on that, so our plan sponsors do.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, EHIM can transparently say we do not collect rebates, because that has always been our model. But now we have a different ownership structure, and ProCare does. ProCare is one of the largest rebate aggregation companies in the country in the volume that they're able to get at. And so now our claims live on their platform. That platform is collecting rebates, and so those will flow through the plans.
But still with the idea of the lowest net cost.
Not only that, actually the way we're evolving and what feels good to EHIM, and I got to be telling you, what makes me excited to go to work, as corny as that is we have figured out how to do that transparently.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I know. I want to ask you, because the transparency word is like, everybody likes to talk about transparency. It depends on whose definition.
Oh, yeah.
Well, so what do we mean when we say we're maintaining that transparency?
It means that we are going to actually show what's driving the rebates. Okay. We are going to show, quite honestly, we can get down to the claim level.
Okay.
What are the drugs that drove it? These are, this was why it was there. There was not a lower costing alternative. Like it basically says, we've done just like we always have in specialty drugs and the different categories. We are going to do everything we can to make sure we mitigate risk and that we, take care of the members, we get the patients the drugs they need, but at the lowest cost possible. And then if there is anything left over and there is a rebate, we're going to pass that through back to the plan sponsor.
Right.
And we're going to do it as quick as possible. We're not going to hold on. A lot of PBMs hold on to rebates for months at a time. We've seen there's usually a 6 to 12 month lag. And
is a rebate treated almost like premium and float in the insurance industry?
In
where
some
they're making
capacity,
money?
yes.
Okay.
I think in the BUCAs it is.
Okay.
I think that's how they do their admin fee credits, and they kind of, adjust accordingly. I think that some PBMs will give out rebates quicker, but they true up at the end of the year, and and they take it from different buckets. I believe it all gets to how close you are to the source of rebates, and that's the other piece that I've learned. And and listen, I've had a crash course in rebates to a new level than I ever was exposed to.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to tell you, the first night, Spencer, I heard about it. You mentioned I'm as honest as a fault. I mean, I heard about kind of some of our groups, and in the last year or two, how there could be money extra. And I had a really hard time with it. I mean, I got emotional. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I went home and, I cried. I was like, have I been not telling, the truth?
Yeah.
And it was our truth. It was EHIM's truth. And it was the way we did our job. And that night, I called one of my mentors in this industry and I said, what if I was wrong? What if there is, I've gone toe to toe with people. And this person said back to me, they go, how did your groups perform? And I said, well, they performed. We wouldn't have been in business. We were able to substantiate. And she said, that's all you need to know.
Yeah.
And now you basically get to tell people you've got another way to get better.
Well, that's the way I look at it is like, obviously the podcast self-funded with Spencer. A huge advocate of self-funding.
Yeah.
But if a group is fully insured, do I get to say they're wrong for being fully insured? No. It's for their particular circumstances. Yep. They made that decision for a whole host of reasons, and they stay or chose to be fully insured because of those reasons.
Yep.
Now, could I maybe present a better argument, or could a consultant come in and unpack why maybe they shouldn't be fully insured? Sure. But that group still gets to make that decision. Is that right for them or not? So is there a right or wrong, or is there a great area depending on perspective?
And I think with anything in any business, and even if it's something you, like I said, hung your hat on, you have to evolve. You have, otherwise you lose you opportunity and you risk not being relevant.
Yeah.
And so I believe, again, it's funny. We were just, I hate that I'm realizing now how many times I've said the word transparent. We were just challenged by our own team to come up with our pitch not using that word because it's an expectation these days. Yeah. Everybody's transparent. I mean,
it's table stakes, right?
It is. Yeah. And so, the evolution of that is show it. How do you use it? What does it mean to a group? What does it mean financially? And I think that we've got past the how do PBMs make money. I mean, you could have a whole podcast just on that.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. PBMs are going to make money, but how are you going to provide value?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier because it interests me, but I think it might be relevant to the conversation. You touched on there's a lot of private equity money coming into this space. Depending on where you sit and your perspective, that's a good or a bad thing. Yeah. So weigh in on, I understand the reasoning. There's opportunity like we talked about earlier, but what do you think the influence of the private equity money is going to do to the PBM space?
I've already seen it. It's changing some of the most amazing PBMs that are out there because they're losing focus on what they did to begin with.
So changing potentially for a negative, in a negative way.
Yeah, I mean, They're changing the structures, they're changing the model, they're changing because they're looking at maxing profitability and they're getting closer and closer to being like, quite honestly, like the big three.
Yeah.
I'd love a private equity based PBM if anybody listens to this podcast to reach out to me and say, here's, not competitively, but I love connecting with other people. And, I mean, we're seeing it change the scope of what I think PBMs were trying to do in the beginning, which was the right thing.
Yeah, and I mean, private equity is
But it's not always look, my husband's employed by a firm that's private equity.
Well, I have a good friend that's a private equity.
Yeah, and so I think private equity can
it's
also...
It's pervasive, though, right?
I think private equity can also, pour gas on a fire. It can help, get more exposure. It can help with marketing. It can help with, changing, the way you approach a client sale. I mean, there's a lot of cool things private equity can do.
Yeah.
I don't want to totally discharge it, but it's...
Yeah, I mean, it always interests me when like you find out that money's starting to pour in or has been pouring into our space, and for good reasons, but also because, they're in it to make money. And
also, what's the end game? Because I find when a lot of private equity buy something, they're also trying to bundle it all up to go sell it. So
profit.
Again, so it's, I don't know. I think that it's an interesting time.
Well, it's almost like hot potato, though. It's like you package it up, you sell it to somebody else, and they have to go try to do the same thing and sell it to somebody else. Who's left holding the bag at the end of the day with something that's way overvalued, right? And they're left with going, well, we can't make money on this now. I think it's a little bit of a hot potato to whoever stuck with the businesses at the end. But that's just my perspective. I want to ask you though, if I know my audience is predominantly brokers, right? Most people that find value, I think, based on the conversations I have, are brokers. Let's put my broker hat on for a minute, if you don't mind. And let's talk about what are the things that I, as a consultant, that maybe isn't as experienced in the PBM world of validating and vetting these PBMs. What questions should I go in on and ask on behalf of my employer?
Sure. Understanding the services the PBM provides. I think that's the first and most important thing. And understanding, what their strategy of attack is, right? I mean, obviously you have to make sure that the PBM can financially justify, but I don't think most PBMs are going to show negative, quoting and pricing. So it's all about what are the guarantees, what is the PBM willing to, stand behind as well from a service perspective, and what access to data will you have as a consultant, and how quickly and what level, and, will the PBM work with you on that data? Because data is that's another like misuse thing I think in our business is everybody wants data. What are you going to do with it? And talk about, consultants need to understand if they have all this data, how will you help them use it? Yeah,
well, totally. Yeah. I had the guy, the CEO of Handle Health on, and he's like, we have these files with like, I have thousands of terabytes of data and trillions of lines of like claims. It's like, that data is so overwhelming even to the most sophisticated machines, unless you could do something with it and turn it into usable data. It's just, it's garbage, right?
And who's the onus on it to do something usable? I think that, the data I think is used a lot for shopping, which is okay. And if that's what you want to do. But I think it's, look, as a PBM saying, look, we noticed through your data, you don't have a lot of compliancy with, diabetic meds, or, we've noticed an uptick in, pain medication and narcotics. And, maybe we need to put in a program. Maybe we need to work together. Maybe we need to look at what's happening on the medical side. It's working together.
Well, and how do you keep your PBM honest throughout the relationship? So let's say I've chosen EHIM and I'm happy with what you've presented as services. Things are going well. How do I continue to make sure that you are staying true to your word and delivering on the value?
I think it's through discount audits and making sure that, that stays stable. I think it's making sure that there's not a lot of spikes in spend that are not, anomalies. You're going to have anomalies. But I think that it's making sure, the industry has seen double-digit increases. Our PBM, and again, I don't mean this to be a commercial, but our PBM has been able to maintain for pretty much more than a decade less than 5% trend.
Okay.
And by the way, we did that with no rebates. We did that with a lot of different things and levers we have access to now, which is great, but we still stand behind who we were before. And I think it's a matter of, if your PBM is not amazing in certain categories, then you have to figure out why.
Okay. Well, and then I would love for you to weigh in on the vetting of these vendors in the first place, right? Like, I know, and we've experienced this ourselves, spreadsheeting a PBM is pretty difficult to do because it doesn't necessarily tell the story. We're working on that. But I realize that's one of those things, because of the complexity of it. You don't just put it on a piece of paper or an Excel document or inside a plan site and truly deliver what exactly is different between those PBMs. So how would I vet?
Sure.
vendors?
So I think, look, there's a huge industry of PBM consultants that are out there now that can help consultants that are out there. And I think, forget vetting the individual PBM. If you want to vet PBM consultants, I think the key is making sure that their incentives are aligned with yours, and the client. And I say that because I see RFPs. I always question, we see, everything gets down to getting paid a fair amount of money to do the service you're providing, right? And that's, everybody's holding us to those regards, right, in the PBM industry. it should go true for everybody that's involved, right? We see consultants out there, and I'm not obviously going to name any, but we've seen PBM consultants that charge more admin fees to manage the program than the PBM that's actually processing the claims and doing the work.
Yeah.
And so I think it's making sure, that you understand, and again, understanding the goal of the client and understanding what is it that is they want. Maybe it's a client that wants everybody to have Optum on their ID card because that's the name and they know they're paying a premium. Well, then don't look at PBMs like us because that's not what they want.
Yeah.
Maybe they do want to watch their spend and they really do, want to get down to the brass tacks and they really want to understand, where all the money is. Well, then work with a PBM that's transparent, but write your RFP that way.
Okay.
And that's the other thing that I think consultants need to understand is, even though we have access to rebates and we have all these programs now, if I see an RFP say, show me how you're going to maximize the rebates, we're going to decline it. It's not the right fit for us.
Okay.
We don't want to maximize rebates. We want to minimize them and, really try to get them as close to zero as possible because it means you manage the plan right.
That's the whole thing like taxes, right? You don't want to maximize rebate at the end of the year when you pay your taxes because that means you overpaid and floated the government alone.
I love when people get to there because it means I did a good job explaining
Well, good.
it.
Okay.
Yes.
I try to do that. Like, how can I relate it to something?
I've used that as an example, but the fact that you got there before I was able to means I did a good job explaining
Well, I guess
it.
I'm listening.
Yeah, no, it's awesome.
Well, I want to ask you, if you don't mind, specialty is always this sort of like hot subject. You talked about it earlier. I think maybe there's some recent stuff that's happened, perhaps some flexing against some of these carve-outs that's going on. So what's happening there?
So here, I think, listen, first to, understand what you're talking about is that there are a number of manufactured programs out there from these there's two buckets. You've got very high cost specialty drugs where, aside from competition in the class of drugs, there aren't other options, right? It's not like somebody with severe rheumatoid arthritis can go pop an Advil every morning and that's like a good substitution. And so within that class, there are a large number of manufacturer programs out there that are intended to offset member responsibility. Okay. I will say that there are those types of coupons in regular brand drugs, but those are a little different. Those are actually out there to keep people on expensive brand drugs and maybe not go take a generic and to not go do these types of things.
Yeah.
So these programs are out there, and I think that what has happened is, look, there was opportunity for employers to save money, but it wasn't intended for employers. It was intended for members. And what you got was an entire subset of an industry in the PBM space of these, and I air quote, carve out vendors where they are not PBMs. All they were doing was carving a category of drug away from the PBM.
Okay.
And they were going after these programs on behalf of the plan sponsor and charging a fee to go do, these programs that really were out there for members and making money on them. And, what you are talking about is, recently one of the manufacturers kind of slammed by name these companies that are out there. Yeah, no, they actually came out and said, these are coupons for members. We will not work with X company, Y company, and Z company.
Oh, literally name names.
They
publicly.
literally name names because they became aware of these carve out, competitors. We as a PBM aren't doing these carve out kind of programs. Really, we manage specialty drugs. And what we do is we employ strategies and we work with members. And again, we're trying to work with their own out of pockets. And our approach has been not to play games within the formulary, but to build formularies that are there to mitigate risk and also make sure that the members have the best out-of-pocket experience possible.
What do you think the response will be from the specialty carve-out entities to kind of respond and combat this blacklisting, if you will?
I'm sure they'll evolve.
Okay.
Like anybody. I mean, again, it's they're not bad guys. They're there to, they're there to serve a function. They're there to employ people and to make money. But their overall function is in the right space. They're trying to help employers, help people save money. I think that, for PBMs that, are the ones that are not putting in strategies and are not, like, for example, that are maximizing rebates, that it behooves them to have the most expensive drugs out there, they'll find a new way to do it.
What do you think those third-party vendors that are doing this were essentially created as a function of the deficiency of the PBMs in the first place, that weren't doing it properly?
100%.
So they just said, we'll go and do it better, right? Or we'll carve that and we could do it better. But now they've done it perhaps too well or marketed themselves too much to be on the radar.
Yep.
And now they're getting some pushback is what
Correct.
I'm hearing. Okay. So I always love what is the current state of the union? What's happening? We look at, the big three PBMs, or you look at the BUCAs, like they've got a lot of power behind them. They've a lot of will. They
Yep.
can flex their might, right? And so this notion of some of the things that we would think should be done in the best interest of the employer objectively doesn't mean there won't be pushback for some of these
and
things.
again, it all gets back to the very first thing we started talking about, which is what is driving your formulary? What is driving the PBM to operate? And there's a lot of PBMs that are, they say they talk the talk. No PBM is marketing themselves as the most expensive player in town.
Yeah.
But look at the results. Look at their trend. Look at, Humira skyrocketed, to the number one specialty drug in the country a couple years ago. How did that happen? Did we have an epidemic? No, it just was marketed. And, it doesn't, of course we have Humira go through our books. I mean, it's, but what is the PBM's overall approval rating of that drug? And, what is, are they trying to mitigate and step therapy, et cetera?
Well, as we zoom out and sort of kind of go into the end of the podcast, and we'll be future looking of kind of like what you think the future state of the union will be. I do want to weigh on kind of a relevant drug right now that's been in the news, the Ozempic.
Yep.
So tell me what that is and what is the debate that's kind of raging right now about it?
Yeah. So Ozempic, what they learned about it, and disclaimer, I am not a pharmacist nor am I a doctor. This
Neither
is
am
just
I.
me reading and understanding, just for readers out there, and the liability of the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast.
Understood.
Ozempic, I believe, was proven. It's a diabetic. It's a type 1 or it's type 2 diabetic medication, or it can be used for type 1. And what they realized was in certain people, it was causing weight loss.
Okay.
And so, they got FDA approval. It does have other names, Wegovy. There's a number of lookalikes out there. But essentially, it was being used at first off-label, but now it's being used FDA approved.
So it would be on-label
for weight loss.
Okay.
And,
so what is the debate about it?
The debate is weight loss.
Okay.
It's 15, this is not my opinion, but 15 years ago, when you have a self-funded pharmacy plan as an employer, you literally are picking every category of medication and how you want to cover it. There are some laws, with PPACA, et cetera, that you have to cover. But there are some things that you, as a self-funded employer, unless your state mandates it, that you get to choose on. Like, for example, fertility drugs. Unless you're in New Jersey, for example, they mandate in a self-funded plan you have to cover them. But an employer here in Texas, they get to decide, do we want to cover them? Do we not? And they look to the PBM. Well, what's our risk? What's our exposure? What's it going to do to stop loss, et cetera? And one of the categories that was always on that list was anti-obesity drugs, because that's been a category for many, many years.
Okay.
And ironically, it was really cheap. It was just a category of drugs that many employers would say, no, we're not covering anti-obesity drugs. And the debate is obesity a system of, is it a choice or is it a disease?
A disease, yeah.
And that's where you're getting into, arguments on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And, look, I'm here from a risk side, just like you.
Yeah.
And disease or not, it has so many comorbidities
Absolutely.
that follow it.
Yeah.
And, the question is, and look, now we're on a side where we can look at what are the rebates on this drug? What is the true net cost of the plan, if you cover it? And what are you spending?
If it is a disease state, then it would be covered by insurance, right? Or is that
Well, it's a philosophical thing now.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where you're getting into, because if you look at any SPD, you are finding specific language that does or does not cover weight loss surgeries and or medications with it.
Okay.
So it's like, and again, you would know more than I, are bariatric as a rule typically covered, or is it not?
Actually, I think that's a choice, right? I think it actually has to be written into the plan.
So it's very similar. So
Okay.
it's a matter of, but there are arguments, and good ones, that it's just as important as diabetes, cholesterol.
Well, yeah, I would agree. Like there's a really good philosophical debate that I would actually like to see waged publicly about this very thing, because there is an aggregate impact to if we can get 10 or 20% of our population to drop 30 or 40 pounds or 50 pounds and no longer be categorized as obese and have the comorbidities that you're talking about.
The problem specific to, Ozempic is we don't know how long people are going to be on it. We don't know what there's a lot of question, but I know people who have been on it and are like having amazing results.
Yeah, I want to say the efficacy doesn't sound like it's in question for that purpose, but what are the unintended consequences
and so, but again,
long-term?
people are making decisions, and that's, their choice. And again, it gets back to, well, what should the employer pay for, and, should we, again, this is my opinion. This is not something EHIM is leading with, but I imagine we'll enter a world where it will be covered, but it'll be for 6 months, or there will be a cap on it. And those are the kind of things that I think will be conversations, and that way an employer knows their risk. They know, that they're making, it's just like, commit to quit programs, and smoking cessation and all these other things. We've seen employers for years say, we're going to pay for, well, now it's part of PPACA, but, years ago it was like, we're going to pay for 6 months. And after that, if it doesn't work, it's on you. You know, just different things.
I see. Okay. Well, I appreciate you weighing in on that, and I didn't necessarily prepare you
Pun
for
intended?
that. Yeah, that's funny. We should stop there. No, I want to ask you just kind of the future real quick. Rachel, obviously you have really keen insight of what's going on current day, but also perhaps where we are heading in the world of PBM. So give me, obviously this might just be your personal opinion, but I want to hear what you think the future of the PBM space might look like.
I think the future of the space is going to continue to evolve. I think that with all the reporting mandates that just went down and that were in the process, I mean, they were delayed in December, but there is a lot of data that PBMs have been required to report that literally tracks the dollar. It's going to track the rebates. It's going to show, I mean, for some of these companies that are out there that have their entire, earnings have come from rebate dollars they were withholding, I mean, again, and this is.
So there's going to be some exposure?
Oh, yeah. Okay. And but look, the pessimist in me is like, well, then they're just going to figure out a new way to, to do it. But I think that it's going to have more questions. And the more questions people ask about our industry, the better we're going to get. Look, all these new PBMs that are out there, I didn't say they were bad. I think some of them, I'll be honest, I see some of their press releases, I see things on LinkedIn, and I'm forwarding them. I'm like, this is cool. We got to figure this out.
Yeah.
And, imitation is the what do they say, is the
sincerest
form of flattery.
Yeah.
I mean, it's because I think their PBMs doing some really cool things. And so the better we do, the better we manage, the more we take onus that we're just not an AWP pricing engine. That's, by the way, how PBMs compete, or NADAC, or, there's a lot of different. Get the discounts out of there. Talk about what we're going to do to create healthier people and manage the risk.
I love it.
That's going to be the future.
I love it. Well, so PBM Princess, I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay.
Closing thoughts. What do you want the audience to be thinking about?
That it doesn't have to be such a complex industry. Okay. I think that anybody listening out there with any self-funded group, make your groups examples. Figure out what's working, what's not. How do you make it better? I mean, we've got case studies upon case studies. Use your groups and figure out why they're a case study for good or a case study for bad, and then work with partners to tell the story. Because if each individual employer group is able to tell a story that's, a good or bad and then fixed, then you're really challenging, the norm, and you're really stepping up. And you see this in the RBP space, you see this in medical, but the more creativity that's employed in PBM, the better outcomes we're going to see.
I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you updating me on the PBM world, and it's something that I think I need to continually be updated on.
So well, my goal is, I don't know if you're familiar with Saturday Night Live, where like the hosts that come 5 times get a jacket. Like I'm gunning. I want to self-funded with Spencer, like ribbon or something.
Well, okay. I'll have to figure out.
You have to figure out what multiple guests get. Do you know what, like the Steve Martin? Well,
I do have. I'll let you leave at least with a self-funded with Spencer poker chip, but that'll be a small token of my appreciation.
Well, no, I'm saying I'm gunning for it.
Well, so when the first one to get the 5, and maybe Chris Hamilton, because quite frankly, I've had reasons to get him on a lot. Yeah, but I like that.
Well, no, I mean it could be
the version
of
the green jacket.
You know what I'm talking about.
I like that. Okay, awesome. Well, you might be the second one to get that one then, but I appreciate you, Rach, and we'll let you get on your day. I know you got some calls and things like that, but always a pleasure.
Always. I can't wait to see where we are a year from now.
I love it. See ya.